Welcome to the Money Over 50 podcast, brought to you by Dallas Davison and Michael Hogue from Money Over 50 Financial Advisors. This information is general in nature and does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. Therefore, you should consider whether the information is appropriate for you and your personal circumstances. If you require personal advice, please contact Money Over 50 Financial Advisors. Here are your hosts, Dallas Davison and Michael Hogue.
Welcome to Money Over 50. Today's topic is CBA shares versus Sydney property. Michael, this is your topic, and you've warned me in advance to give you a long runway here and not jump over the top of you and interrupt and interject like I normally do. So the floor is yours. Go for it.
Yeah, so we have quite a few listeners in Sydney and Melbourne, and also the other areas. So first of all, g'day to everyone outside of the North Queensland region that's listening to the Money Over 50 podcast. We certainly were amazed continually at how many listeners we're attracting all over Australia. So it's really good to see. So I actually had a prospective client meeting with a couple from Sydney just recently.
Yep.
And look, they're meeting all their goals. They're in the early 50s, doing a great job. They're fully funding both of their superannuation funds each year, so they're putting the $27,500 in each.
Yep.
Not only that, they've got even more money left over, which they're funding into an investment, a managed fund. And one of the things they had on their bucket list was that they wanted to buy a rental property in Sydney. And we actually didn't have too much time because there's so much information we have to go through in those meetings. We didn't have too much time to actually delve into it beyond that for that particular meeting. I actually asked them, why do you want to do that? And they couldn't really answer. They couldn't really give me an answer. Now, I suspect, I don't know for sure, but I suspect it's because of what's happened with Sydney property prices recently. And they've gone up a lot, of course. So it got me into thinking, I actually wanted to go and track what the Sydney median house price has done and compare that to a not the best company in Australia, but a very good company, anecdotally, in the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. So the results that I got out of this, and bearing in mind, I've pulled this data together from a lot of different sources.
Yep.
And there's conflicting information.
This will be one of these podcasts, we'll warn you now. Yes, all of this data has to be picked from somewhere. We don't have endless indices of resources and all the rest of it.
And the median is like the average, isn't it, Dallas? So, the average retiree is yada, yada, yada. And you're listening and you're going, well, I'm not that person. No one is that person. It's pulled from everywhere. So,
but the concept remains the same. If you're listening to this and you don't like this data point or that data point, the concept remains the same.
Concept's the same.
Please, stay on.
So I've gone back over 30 years, which is the average span of someone's lifetime in retirement, and I've had a look at it. So if I go back to 1991, the median house price in Sydney was $182,000 in 1991, according to a report called Housing Prices in Australia, 1970 to 2003, from Peter Abelson and Demi Chung. So 2021, fast forward 30 years, that median house price is now $1.41 million, according to the Australian Financial Review's article in August 2021. I saw other reports that said it was 1.3 million. I know it's changing all the time. I've taken the higher figure of 1.41 million. So over 1991, $182,000 house in Sydney has grown to somewhere in the ballpark of 1.41 million. So buy a house 1991, $182,000 is now worth $1.41 million. I think I've done really, really well. And I have, of course, assume I rent it out, and we're looking at rental property here because we have to look at rental property. We're comparing this to, we're saying, okay, people will buy and live in their own house, but we're actually comparing
an investment
rental property. Mm-hmm. So assume I rent it out now. the median rent, according to Domain, which is the real estate site, is $550 per week in Sydney. It seems low to me. So I've actually said, let's assume that I actually get $550 per week net of all the costs, of which there are significant costs, such as real estate fees and
rates, water,
and maintenance and all those types of things. So if I got $550 per week for the median house in Sydney and the greater Sydney area, what I get is $28,600 in net rent each year. So I got a $1.41 million house, and it's paying me $28,600 a year in rent. What's the house price gone up over that period of time, over 30 years, to take it from $182,000 to $1.41 million? Well, it's an average compounding rate of return of 7.06%. So again, seems really good.
So that's what you consider the capital growth of that. Over, that's
the capital growth. That's the capital growth.
So, like you say, we've disregarded the yield for these purposes. Just said the capital growth component has been just a shade over 7%.
Yes, and I've been fair when I've compared the CBA shares as well. I've only looked at the dividend you receive separately.
Yeah.
So what if I put the same amount of money into buying CBA shares in 1991 as I would have spent to buy the median house price in Sydney? So I actually buy $182,000 worth of CBA shares at their initial share price, and I take the dividend and I spend it every year. So I don't reinvest any.
So that's the same. That's
the same bundle of shares that I actually bought. I have now. So my $182,000 of CBA shares that I bought in 1991, bearing in mind I haven't accumulated one more share because I've been taking the dividend and spending it, they're now worth $2.9 million as of the 8th of October 2021. This is staggering here. Along the way, in that 30 years, from my $182,000 investment, I've actually received, and this is not a mistake, $2.8 million of dividends. $2.8 million of grossed up dividends from an initial investment of $182,000 30 years ago. And when I say grossed up dividends, I checked, and every single dividend CBA has paid along the way has been fully franked. Which means it comes with 30% tax paid. Now, to make it a fair comparison, so the rent that I get from a rental property, I pay my marginal rate of tax on. And if that's 39%, I pay 39% on that rent that I receive. If I get a CBA share, it comes with 30% tax already paid. So if my marginal rate of tax is 39%, I only pay 9% in tax. So grossed up to account for that, I've received $2.8 million of dividends over that period of time. And my 2021 grossed up dividend is $140,000 alone. So I'm sorry, there's actually no comparison. The CBA shares have obliterated anything that any Sydney house prices have done over that period of time. Am I cherry picking by choosing CBA? I don't think that I am, because it could have picked any number of other companies that have done way better than CBA, like Berkshire Hathaway. I could have picked CSL, which started at 82 cents. And has grown to $290 per share over the same period of time. I could have picked Afterpay, that in 2017 started at $2.95 per share, and it's grown to $122 per share in under 5 years. And I could have picked any other number of company that started at 10 cents and ended up at $10. So where I think CBA is a fair comparison, it's a big company, it's a diversified company. It's not a speculative company. And I'm not picking the best company. I'm not picking the worst. But with the Sydney property market, I'm actually picking the best market, the best known market that we have. So I am cherry picking the Sydney market. I think it's a fair comparison. I'll shut up in a minute, Dallas. I'll let you
I'm just itching to jump in here.
Where people have made money out of Sydney property. And here's how it comes, because there's no comparison. So let's go back through this again. I buy a house in Sydney for $182,000, now worth $1.41 million. That's a good rate of return, 7.06% per annum. I now get $28,600 of rent in the hand, let's assume, or I buy $182,000 worth of CBA shares at the same time. I now get $140,000 of grossed up dividend, which just is so much more than the rent, and my investment has outperformed. It's actually grown to $2.9 million. So it's over double over that period of time. Now, what's worked for people with Sydney Property is that no one scrimped and saved and borrowed to buy the CBA shares.
No.
People scrimped and saved and borrowed and begged to buy the Sydney house, which by its very nature you have to, because you can't buy small bundles.
Buy a portion of it.
If people had done the same with the CBA, and disclaimer here, this is not a recommendation to go out
and buy CBA shares
and buy CBA shares. So this is all for comparison purposes. But there's if people had put the same amount of money into a good quality Australian company like the CBA over that period of time, it's won the grand final. And Sydney house prices have actually come middle of the pack.
Am I allowed to? Am I giving you a long enough runway? I think that you've touched on a great point there, because so we look at these numbers. We often hear people go, "Oh, I bought this house for X and now it's worth Y," or I bought this investment property for X and now it's worth Y. Geez, that's been a good investment. And there's a whole separate podcast here that I think we should talk about how the opportunity cost of what else could I have done with that money. But I think, to me, the really interesting thing here is not to, like you say, it's not to bag Sydney Property, because there's a lesson in this that I think is more important, than saying it's around that behaviour or the attitude towards that investment. So, like you say, 30 years ago, people scrimped and saved and begged and borrowed enough to get the money together to buy that house in Sydney, and then they just held on, and they held on against it. It didn't matter how tight times were. It didn't matter, whether they got bored of saving for their retirement. It didn't matter, that there was some fun trip that they wanted to go on or something they wanted to do. They bought that, and they just held on to it for 30 years, and they didn't get distracted by the fact that the price had gone up or down by 20% in any one year or anything like that. So people's behaviour around investment properties is second to none. It's amazing how things that people do unconsciously when it comes to an investment property it's very hard to get people to do that when they buy CBA shares, for example. So it would have been near on impossible to get people. And again, this is our advice 30 years ago wouldn't have been go and spend $182,000 on CBA shares, but it's very hard to get motivated to scrimp and save and make that happen and to buy that amount of shares. And then secondly, it's very hard to stay motivated to just stay the course. And this is sort of shows it. You didn't have to do anything else. You didn't even have to reinvest your dividends. You didn't have to pick and choose which companies were going to outperform others or how the Australian financial services industry was going or any of those sorts of things. You just bought a heap of shares. You tucked the share certificates under your mattress and you forgot about it for 30 years. And you spent the dividend checks as they rolled in and just forgot about. You just didn't have to think about it at all. And you ended up with $2.9 million, and you ended up with $2.8 million worth of dividends along the way. That's, I think, to me, the real takeaway with a lot of this stuff is that when you're looking at investments, for people who are listening to this, if you're looking at investments that have worked previously for you or things that have worked well in your financial life, what you'll often find is there's nothing inherently brilliant about the actual investment itself. It's primarily what was your behavior and what was your attitude towards that investment. And that's why, people talk about my house has been a great investment. It has been, not because that house was some fantastic house that, returned twice what the benchmark of the property market has done. It's just the fact that we bought it, we paid no attention to price movement for 30 years. We bought it thinking, I'm buying this for the next 30 years. I'm just going to hang on I'm going to do whatever it takes to get in and to accumulate what I need to. Then I'm going to hang on for the ride and tune out all the short-term noise. So I think to me that's one of the big lessons when you look at this is the first one I think is opportunity cost, which we will talk about another time. It's that you can't look at an investment in and of itself. It has to be compared to what else could I have done with that money or with that energy or with that time or whatever. But the second one is for people who are sitting on a property in Sydney or Brisbane or even Townsville or wherever, and that has gone up significantly over the last 30 years. When you break the percentages back down, it's often not that much. Like if you said to people, what do you think the median house in Sydney has gone up by over the last 30 years, they'd think 15%. They wouldn't go up 7%, which is still, above average in terms of capital growth, what you consider for property. But you would assume that all the work has been done by the property market just booming. But what's actually happened is that people have worked hard, saved their money to get their foot in the door, and then they've done whatever it takes to hang on to that property and not be forced to sell it, and not, I'll just sell the bathroom this year because we've got our daughter's wedding come up, or I'll just sell 100 square meters of the front yard because we want to buy a new car or something like that, which is what tends to happen with. And I that's why I was actually thinking, when you said you're cherry picking CBA, I think CBA is a perfect example because every man and his dog that walks in the door here, not every man and his dog, but a lot of people end up with a small parcel of CBA shares. It's I would say the company in Australia that more people.
Yeah, if you were the holder of a Colonial Mutual policy or I think it was Legal and General or something like, so you inherited some CBA shares.
Yeah, a lot of people have got a little
holder
parcel of CBA shares.
Of a life insurance policy with certain insurers that the CBA actually bought out. Yeah. Opportunity cost, you touched on, Dallas, and I think that's the big one. Yeah. It's not to say that you haven't done well and you won't do well. Yeah. So I think the problem for Sydney listeners is that they've been in this booming market continually for such a long period of time that they think the market will go up and up and up and up, and it may very well do so. It may very well continue to grow at 7% per annum. Yeah. It may grow at higher than that. Yeah. Opportunity costs and diversification are two of the big ones that stand out for me, though. Yeah. Our best companies have always and will always outperform residential property in Australia. It has to be that way. Yeah. Our best companies reinvest a lot of the profits that they make every year. They pay out some as a dividend, and they reinvest a lot of them and grow their profits. So if I go back to 1991, the CBA paid a grossed up dividend of $16,000. Yeah. So that's come from their profits. Yeah. So recognise the dividend comes from your profits. Yeah, you can't pay out more as a dividend than your profits allow. I fast forward 30 years, and that grossed up dividend has grown from $16,000 to $140,000 over that period of time. Now that's been achieved by the CBA. And this is true of all Australian companies, especially the good ones. That's been achieved by them earning a profit, reinvesting some of that profit, refining the way they do things, growing their market share, selling off unprofitable businesses, opening up new profitable ones, buying life insurers, buying superannuation funds, all those types of things. Not all of it works, and they unwind positions, of course. But over that period of time, their profit has grown from $16,000 a dividend on this bundle of shares to $140,000. Now, I don't know what the rent was. The median rent was in Sydney in 1991. It's grown now to $550 per week. Yeah. It hasn't grown anywhere near what the profits of. So opportunity cost is a big one in terms of if you're buying a rental property. You already live in Sydney, you're buying a rental property, yes, you might do well, but you in the right companies,
you may well have done better.
You'll probably do better. Yep. Number two, the big one for me is diversification, though. Yep. because what if it doesn't?
Yeah.
What if it stagnates?
Yeah.
So if you already own by its very nature, you can't own a small piece of Sydney property.
No.
It's a big piece that you own by virtue of the median price. If you are thinking of buying a rental property there, it's not to say that you won't do well, but what if things don't continue the way they are?
Yeah.
Our view is that you leave yourself under-diversified.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. And I mean, we've talked about this before, where leading up to retirement, it's not necessarily about swinging for the fences. You are trying to give yourself the highest likelihood of having enough money throughout your retirement. You're not trying to go, I want to be worth $6 million in retirement. You want to make sure that there's next to no chance that you will run out of money. And making a play in any sort of thing where you, for the same reason that we wouldn't recommend, okay, go and take all of your retirement savings and go and buy CBA shares, because CBA might not perform that well over the next 30 years. They might, lose market share to another existing bank or to some new entrant. And so that's why we recommend diversification across all investments. The point that you touched on there, I think, is a great one that for people to, I guess, think about there, is that we sort of know, because we think about this all the time, it's the concept that if I practically think about it and go, I bought that house in Sydney 30 years ago, what's the asset that I bought and what is that now? I bought a 3-bedroom house in Parramatta, for example. I don't know, I'm making up numbers here, but something where I would have got the median house price. I bought that. What do I now own 30 years later? I own 100%. So I bought 100% of a house there. 30 years later, I own the same. I own 100% of that same thing. Now, 30 years ago, and this is what you alluded to with profits growing, the reinvestment, what I actually bought a share of, CBA as a company, as an entity, what I bought a portion of is a vastly different beast now. And that's all that straining and executives coming in, a new CEO getting appointed out, and all the bank tellers in all of the branches all throughout Australia, making transactions and picking up the differential on the interest and on the deposits they've got in versus the loans they've made. All of that striving for more, and new branches being opened and moving into new product lines and moving into new areas in completely. What I actually owned a portion of 30 years ago is a completely different thing now. And that's I think what is people to bear in mind about when we're looking at the reason why your dividends that you're receiving every year now, the reason why your share of that profits has gone up so much. It's not magic. It's that that actual asset is a completely different thing.
Yeah, so
it's a way bigger, more profitable thing.
To conceptualize it, what the CBA and what Woolworths and what all those great companies of Australia and the world have done over that period of time is they've grown what they are.
Yeah.
So they've opened more supermarkets if they're Woolworths.
Yeah.
Such that the 3-bedroom house that you bought in your example, Dallas, in Parramatta in 1991 would now be a 15-bedroom house.
Yes. Yeah. That's a great
because the house would have taken the rent every year and actually reinvested a portion of the rent.
Built a new bathroom and put a new and bought a bit of land from next door
to reinvest in itself.
Yeah.
And houses don't do that. They pay out 100% of their profit or their rent.
Yeah.
100% of their income they pay out in the form of net rental. Whatever rent you derive, less the costs that you have, is paid out. Companies do things differently. They pay out a portion of the dividends. They reinvest a portion. Of the profit they make, they pay out a proportion as a dividend, and they reinvest a proportion. They actually grow the value of the company.
Yeah. Well, I think that you've nailed all the key points here, and I think the way that you frame this is the right way to think of it. Is that it's not CBA versus Sydney house prices, or it's not shares versus property, or it's not companies versus houses. It's just a compared to thing. It's not meant to be an argumentative thing, and it's not to say that that any decision that you make is the wrong decision. It is just, I think, a very interesting thing if you're looking at it as, if I'm accumulating assets for retirement, I want the asset that is going to pay me a rising income stream throughout my 30-year retirement. So if I'm going to buy a house in order to achieve that, it may well work in under the strict definition of it might put me in a better financial position than what I am now. But you really have to think about, is that the best way to achieve the outcome that I want, which is that growing, rising income stream throughout my retirement. When you look at that and go, right, if all I'd done 30 years ago for my retirement was go out and buy $182,000 worth of CBA shares, I now have $140,000 a year worth of grossed up dividend. I'm done. Like, I don't need to do anything else for my retirement effectively. I just live on that dividend. And again, we're missing a whole host of steps within here, but it's an interesting one where if someone gave you the option to go, if someone said you've got a time machine now, you can go back 30 years ago and I'll give you 182 grand, which one would you do? I think it's very counterintuitive to people that, knowing what we do now, it feels like the right answer is go and buy a house in Sydney. But when you do that comparison, you go, well, I could have done that and I would have done very well, but maybe there are other ways that I could have achieved not just a similar outcome, but actually a far better outcome. Yeah,
look, it was an interesting one to do, and I think you summarised that well. This is not a fight. We're not picking a fight here with Sydney property owners at all.
You watch the comments on Facebook. It'll sound like we are.
You guys have done very well.
Yeah.
What it's about is the next amount of money that you put somewhere.
Yeah.
Look at that opportunity cost.
Yeah.
And diversification. They're the two big things.
Yeah, and I think that's the other. And while we're in the process of patting people on the back here, I think the other thing to really look at is when we're looking at what's our plan for the next 30 years and what has worked well for us in the last 30 years, really burrow into not just what assets have gone up over the last 30 years, but what are the behaviours that we've had around our money that have worked really well. And I think that for that, this is where the house price thing is a really good example. Is when you think about how you've thought about and how you've behaved around that investment, that is probably the right way to think about your retirement savings. Is that, right, I'm going to accumulate an asset that I'm going to hold for the next 30 years, and I just want to derive an income from it. I don't care what the price does in the short term. I will do what it takes to accumulate the amount of assets that I need to spit me out that growing income stream in retirement. I'm going to tune out the noise. I'm not going to get distracted. I'm not going to sell off a bathroom every now and then. I'm just going to make a right decision and then stick to my plan and work my plan. And that's worked. That behaviour has worked really well over the last 30 years, and that behaviour is what you will need throughout retirement.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Money Over 50 podcast with Money Over 50 financial advisors. We look forward to catching up again soon.